One win in the past 12 games, bottling 3-0 leads with 15 minutes to go, 7th in the Premier League, 22nd in the Champions League, and very much at risk of not playing a single Champions League knockout game until 2027. What on earth is happening at Man City? The simple answer would be they lost Rodri, which is certainly a big reason, but it's a bit deeper than that. With Rodri absent at the start of the season, Manchester City was still undefeated until match week 10, where they lost to Bournemouth in the league and Tottenham in the cup a bit before that, and that's where things got bad. The cracks really began to show against Fulham, where Manchester City got outplayed, but Adama Traore had other plans. And even games like Southampton and Wolves, it was pretty obvious that Man City didn't deserve the 3 points, but got them anyway. In these games, Manchester City looked terrible at defending transitions. Wide transitions, central transitions, they just looked completely hopeless and exposed. And this was basically foreshadowing the main reason for their problems, but the main difference in these games were they at least had the opportunity to actually outscore their oppositions. Gvardiol was playing like a winger, Kovacic was playing incredibly, and he could also fire off some thunderguns, but at the same time, despite this, Haaland was already beginning to show a decline. They weren't creating enough for their main goal scorer, and he just wasn't as potent in front of goal. And again, these were some massive red flags, but they were masked by the likes of Kovacic and Gvardiol being able to score from anywhere. Then Bournemouth is where all these issues were fully exposed. Man City stopped getting bailed out by their opposition's missing chances, thundercans from Gvardiol and Kovacic, or the defenders. They actually had to face their problems. The issue started when Guardiola decided to put out a midfield of 60-year-old Gundogan, Mateo Kovacic, and Bernardo Silva/Phil Foden interchanging. Do you notice the issue here? Who the fuck is meant to create on this midfield? Especially when you have one of the best poachers in world football right in front of you. Foden is someone whose best asset is playing in tight spaces, creating angles to shoot, but it's not playing someone like Haaland through with through-balls like someone like De Bruyne would. Whereas Bernardo Silva is someone whose best assets are retaining/carrying the ball, pressing, providing control, whilst Kovacic/Gundogan are both tempo controllers. The midfield is just painfully uncreative, and anyone could smell from a while away, this would not be sustainable. The only chances Erling Haaland gets nowadays are congested box rebounds or crosses when he's aerially weak. These aren't his main strengths. You need to be able to play through balls where he can isolate 1v1s with his superior physicality against defenders. No one in the current squad can do this. And this doesn't even come down straight to injuries. Guardiola had the opportunity to play Savinho, one of the most creative players in Europe last year, but he didn't give him a single minute in the Bournemouth game, for example. This is just low-key, and honestly, this is probably the least of the issues. The real issues come from how Manchester City defend transitions. It's a complete mess. And again, this stems back to Rodri's absence. That midfield has zero physicality. They're completely incapable of defending transitions or winning duels. Pension and Gundogan, Kovacic, who is a makeshift 6, and Phil Foden are gonna get absolutely rammed through. Now this leaves even more pressure for the defense because the midfield are unable to win any sort of duels and break fast breaks. And the second biggest issue is that right hand side of Manchester City's defense, particularly Kyle Walker, who's had one of the biggest fall from graces I've ever seen. His defensive awareness has become shocking, and it just looks like real life issues are just affecting his game. His head is basically elsewhere, you know? And then Kyle Walker's competition is Rico Lewis, who is great in possession but is a complete liability out of it because he's just absolutely weak and lacks any sort of physicality. This makes it incredibly easy for oppositions to be targeting that right hand side and creating pressure to create a lot of high quality chances. But why is this different from the start of the season? Because, you know, they lacked Rodri then, they were playing Kyle Walker then, they were playing Rico Lewis then. Because back then, Manchester City could actually create. Their attack was clicking. Kevin De Bruyne was fit, Jack Grealish was fit, they could control games, sustain pressure, score early, and essentially just gain a mental edge over oppositions because oppositions would naturally try to attack a bit more after City score, and Manchester City rip through that extra space and dominate games. Now they basically lack any sort of creative threat, and unlike that middle period, they stopped getting bailed out by the likes of Stones and Guardiola. And teams also won't look to attack them from the front foot because they know they won't create and they can target them on the break. Manchester City have a lot of holes, and teams have just began to exploit these holes. The weak midfield in terms of physicality, the lack of creativity in the squad outside of Kevin De Bruyne, the lack of goal threat outside of Erling Haaland, and the completely amateurish right-hand side defensively. It's just a mess. And players like Phil Foden have also just lost their hunger. The criticism got to his head, he started posting his PFA Player of the Year trophies on his story, only to not back it up. He doesn't want to receive the ball deep, play through pockets, create the angles himself to shoot like last season. Instead, he simply expects to receive the ball on the edge of the box from his sideways passes and shoots it at unfavorable angles whilst low and confident. Either that or he's just overconfident and is just overestimating his ability. Another example is Josko, who started off the season brilliantly, but in the past few games, he's just looked like a complete mess defensively. So teams have also begun to target that left side as well as the right side. So now we have two vulnerable flanks combined with a weak midfield, which is just a dream for transitions to target. The centre back simply can't handle that level of pressure, and injuries haven't helped, particularly their back line, but Guardiola keeps sticking with his favourites, particularly in midfield, which makes it even worse when something desperately needs to change. The midfield lacks energy. They can't press, they can't run, defend breaks, but Guardiola keeps persisting with the Josko brothers Gundogan and Bernardo. They need youth, they need energy. Players like Nico O'Reilly or Jacob Bright, who have impressed in preseason, deserve much more of a chance. But largely, a lot of this stems due to poor squad planning as well. Guardiola knows, and he said in a press conference himself, that Rodri can't play every game. If the Premier League had an NBA schedule, Rodri would still be here. So why on earth, knowing that, do you not opt to buy a single backup six? You are one of the richest clubs in the world, so this is just a ridiculous decision. You're not Ipswich fucking town, you're Manchester City. Same with De Bruyne, 33 years old. He can't play every single game, he has freaking hamstring issues, and guess what? No backup. And when you don't have backups for either of these positions, two of your most important players, things are gonna get exposed when neither of these are available. And add that to Ruben Diaz also missing games, and you have no leadership in the back. Another thing, right? Jack Grealish is not a touchline winger. He's gone a fucking year without scoring, okay? That's embarrassing. He was never a goal scorer, right? I'm not expecting him to score a hat-trick every single game. You shouldn't expect goals from him. Guardiola at the time broke the British transfer record knowing this, but he also broke the transfer record seeing him play in a central role for Aston Villa, either a free role on the left or straight up central role. And he was one of the best players in the league and on track for arguably PFA Player of the Year before his injury in 2021. That's how good he was. Guardiola puts him in midfield on his debut against Tottenham and he bosses it. This was Aston Villa Grealish at its peak. And guess what? He never plays midfield again. He gets restricted to this touchline role to recycle the ball and he has his confidence destroyed. He was brilliant in the fucking treble season, but other than that, he's been fucking dreadful. But what's this got to do with ending this, right? That's probably what you're asking. Half of Man City's midfield is out. There's no energy in the stars and they need fresh legs. And I understand for a while Grealish was also out, but this was a chance Grealish was going to get in midfield. And he finally does. Nottingham Forest, the only game Man City win in this 12-game stretch. Grealish plays in midfield. And he absolutely fucking bosses it to no one's surprise, arguably dropping a man of the match performance alongside KDB and Doku. And they win the game 3-0. And you know what Guardiola does? Benches him next game. So whatever, okay, he starts against midfield against Juventus midweek. And honestly, despite the loss, it was still one of the only performances I wouldn't call shit in this run. The result was unfair because City were actually doing things with the ball. Even Guardiola said himself it wasn't a bad performance. And guess what? After this game, Grealish is back on the touchline. Like, it's genuinely absurd, right? He sucks as a touchline winger. Grealish centrally does fix a lot of the problems that you're having. He gives energy, he gives control, and he gives creativity. But Pep has other plans. To carry on playing his favourites like Gundogan, Bernardo, and even Foden, who has been poor for 6 months. So the main question is, can this be fixed in January? Can Man City make a miraculous comeback? And yes, they can, and yes, the problem can be fixed. I think it's a simple case of 2 signings minimum. Maybe that isn't simple, but it's Man City. Man City needs someone capable out of possession to stop breaks, track back, someone that has high energy, and Bruno Guimaraes is the unrealistic option. But he is also the option that would completely change them. You know, even if he isn't realistic, that is the sort of profile they should be looking at. A Rodri deputy, but also can double up as an 8 if need be. In possession, he's able to switch play, provide goal threat, and act as almost a box-to-box. Whilst out of possession, he can hold his ground, track back, press high, and break transitions. And on top of this, I think they also need a high-energy creator. De Bruyne is done physically, right? He has the quality still, but physically you just can't rely on him. You need someone able to supply Haaland, because Haaland is not a self-sufficient player. He needs a creator beside him. Claudio Everetti is coming, but I don't know if he's going to be ready. You get these 2 signings minimum, instantly you look a lot better in possession because you can actually create for your main goal scorer. And out of possession, you also look great because you can actually defend breaks and you actually have energy in that midfield. And in my opinion, you obviously also need a right back, but I don't think there are going to be many in January. And as inside, I think Rico Lewis will be best as an advanced state.